Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases recorded in the history of Charleston. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments from where you are watching and the exact time at which you are listening to this narration. We're interested to know how far these documented accounts reach and at what moments of the day or night they are being heard. The winter of 1839 in Charleston, South Carolina, brought more than just the customary chill to the Battery. In this prosperous port city, where stately mansions lined the harbor and the burgeoning medical college had recently survived a bitter faculty dispute, an enigma would unfold that would haunt the medical community for generations. It was the case that would come to be known among physicians in hushed tones as the dying widow science couldn't explain. The mysterious affliction and death of one Caroline Duval. On East Bay Street, not far from the newly developed pleasure gardens that would later become known as the Battery, stood a handsome three-story Georgian residence belonging to the recently widowed Caroline Duval. At 34 years of age, Mrs. Duval had been the picture of genteel southern widowhood for nearly 2 years since the passing of her husband, Thomas Duval, a prosperous merchant with shipping interests that connected Charleston to ports throughout the Atlantic world. The Duval residence stood as a testament to the family's prominence in Charleston society. High ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, mahogany furniture imported from England, and portraits of distinguished ancestors spoke of old money and established connections. Yet beneath this veneer of respectability and wealth lay something dark and unspoken that would only emerge in the final days of Caroline Duval's life. According to accounts preserved in the private notes of Dr. William Harper, one of the city's most respected physicians, Mrs. Duval had been in robust constitution and exceptional spirits through the Christmas season of 1838. A regular attendant at St. Philip's Episcopal Church, she had been seen at numerous holiday gatherings, a demure but engaging figure despite her widow's weeds. Harper's notes indicate that it was approximately January 8th when a peculiar malaise first overcame the widow. "Called to the Duval residence this morning," Harper wrote in his medical diary, preserved now in the Waring Historical Library. "The patient complains of a profound weariness unlike anything she has experienced before. No fever present, pulse steady, eyes clear, no cough nor respiratory distress evident. Recommended rest and a tonic of quinine." 3 days later, Harper returned to find Mrs. Duval bedridden and significantly altered. His notes from January 11th detail observations that would be the first indications of a medical mystery. Mrs. D speaks of a sensation she describes as her bones turning to glass, claims she can feel them becoming brittle and transparent. "Physically, I can detect no abnormality beyond a slight elevation in temperature." Her maid, Susanna, reports that the mistress insists on keeping all curtains drawn, claiming the light shines through her. By mid-January, Caroline Duval's condition had deteriorated to the point where Dr. Harper requested consultation with his colleague, Dr. James Moultrie, a senior faculty member at the Medical College of South Carolina. The consultation, documented in both men's notes, revealed the escalating strangeness of the case. "The patient now refuses all food," Moultrie recorded, claiming her insides have become hollow and reflective. She speaks in whispers and insists that her voice echoes inside her chest. Upon examination, we find no evidence of physical disease. Lungs clear, heart rhythm regular though somewhat rapid, no abdominal distension or pain upon palpation, no evidence of jaundice or other liver involvement. The patient becomes most distressed when questioned about her late husband. The behavior of the household staff during this period, as noted by both physicians, suggested something beyond mere concern for their mistress. The elderly butler, Frederick, repeatedly refused to enter Mrs. Duval's bedchamber, claiming that the air inside stings like vinegar. The housekeeper, Mrs. porter was observed making protective signs when passing the threshold and hanging small pouches of herbs at the doorways, practices typically associated with the Gullah people and their beliefs regarding protection against evil spirits. As January progressed into February, Caroline Duval's decline accelerated in ways that defied medical explanation. Dr. Harper's notes from February 3rd describe a woman transformed. Mrs. D no longer recognizes me, though her eyes follow my movements. Her skin has taken on a peculiar translucency, particularly around the temples and wrists. When I held her hand to check her pulse, I noted an extraordinary coolness to her flesh, though she does not present as a fever patient whose extremities have gone cold. Rather, there is something unnatural about the temperature, as though she has been standing in winter air. It was at this point that the case began to attract wider attention within Charleston's small but prestigious medical community. 3 additional physicians were called in: Dr. John Edwards, Dr. Samuel Wilson, and Dr. Thomas Frost. The 5 medical men, representing the finest medical education available in America and Europe at the time, found themselves utterly baffled. Dr. Frost, a man known for his methodical approach and skepticism regarding fashionable diagnoses, wrote in his private correspondence to a colleague in Philadelphia, "I have witnessed patients in the throes of typhoid, yellow fever, and the most virulent cholera. I have seen the ravages of consumption and the horrific progressions of untreated syphilis, yet I have never encountered anything that approximates the condition of Mrs. Caroline Duval. She appears to be dissolving while still alive, a process that medical science has no language to describe." The physicians, adhering to the medical theories of the time, attempted various treatments. Bloodletting was performed, though with curious results. Dr. Wilson noted that the blood drawn was of unusual viscosity and appeared to separate rapidly, with a clear fluid rising to the top within minutes rather than hours. Poultices were applied. Tinctures of various medicinal herbs were administered. Mercury, that staple of 19th century medical treatment, was given in carefully measured doses. Nothing halted the progression of Caroline Duval's condition. By mid-February, a new and disturbing symptom emerged. The patient began to speak in a voice that her servants claimed was not her own. Dr. Harper's notes from February 15th contain the first reference to this development. Mrs. D addressed me today using phraseology and intonation eerily reminiscent of her late husband. When I commented on this, she laughed in a manner most inappropriate and declared, "Thomas always said a wife becomes one flesh with her husband. He never specified which one of us would have to leave." The servants reported that at night Mrs. Duval could be heard having extended conversations with herself, alternating between her normal voice and this deeper masculine tone. The housemaid Susanna, who slept in an adjoining room, told Dr. Moultrie that she had heard the master's voice as clear as day, coming from Missy's mouth. As February waned, Caroline Duval's physical deterioration accelerated. Her weight dropped dramatically, though she now consumed small amounts of broth and tea. Her hair, previously a rich chestnut brown with few strands of grey, became brittle and colourless within the span of days. Most disturbing to her physicians was the continued alteration in her skin, which Dr. Edwards described as possessing a quality reminiscent of fine porcelain when light falls across it. On February 27th, the physicians gathered for what would be their final consultation while the patient still lived. The notes from this meeting, preserved in the archives of the Medical Society of South Carolina, reveal their collective bewilderment. Despite our combined experience exceeding 120 years of medical practice, we find ourselves unable to classify Mrs. Duval's affliction within any known category of disease. The patient exhibits no recognized pattern of fever, no identifiable infection, no tumor or growth that might explain her decline. Her mind, when lucid, remains sharp, though her personality has altered dramatically. She speaks of herself as becoming empty and making room. When pressed as to what she's making room for, she smiles in a manner that all present agreed was deeply unsettling and says only, "He's been so patient." The final days of Caroline Duval's life are documented in extensive detail, as Dr. Harper had by this time moved into the Duval home to maintain constant observation of this unprecedented case. His notes from March 2nd contain observations that would later be scrutinized by medical authorities as far away as Paris and Vienna. Mrs. D now refuses to have any mirrors in her room, claiming that he can be seen in them, standing behind her. The servants confirm they will not enter the room if there is a reflective surface present. This morning, I observed a curious phenomenon. When sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtains and fell across the patient's hand as it lay upon the counterpane, there appeared to be a subtle prismatic effect, as though her flesh refracted the light. When I attempted to examine this more closely, Mrs. D withdrew her hand and turned her face to the wall, murmuring, "He doesn't want you to see yet." On March 3rd, Caroline Duval fell into what appeared to be a catatonic state. Her breathing became shallow, her pulse thread-like but persistent. Dr. Harper noted that her skin had become so translucent that the network of veins at her temples and wrists was clearly visible, but strangely altered. The vessels appear not blue, but crystalline, as though filled with clear liquid rather than blood. It was in the pre-dawn hours of March 4th, 1839, that the final chapter of this medical mystery unfolded. According to Dr. Harper's account, he was awakened from a light sleep in the chair beside Mrs. Duval's bed by a quality of silence more profound than the mere absence of sound. Upon checking his patient, he found that she had ceased breathing, yet her body did not present with the typical signs of recent death. "There was no cooling of the extremities," he wrote, "for they were already cold. There was no stiffening, for her limbs remained pliant. Most disturbing was the complete absence of lividity or any indication that blood had begun to settle according to the laws of gravity. Indeed, when I attempted to close her eyes, which had remained open and fixed upon the ceiling, I found myself unable to do so, as though the lids had somehow become fused in their open position." What followed was documented not only by Dr. Harper, but corroborated in separate accounts by Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper, and 2 other servants who were summoned to the room. As the first light of dawn filtered through the drawn curtains, Caroline Duval's body appeared to change before their eyes. Harper's clinical language gives way to stunned disbelief in his notes. The patient's form seemed to lose definition, the boundaries between flesh and air becoming indistinct. There was a quality to her remains that I can only describe as vitreous, not in temperature or texture, but in the way light moved through rather than across the surface. For approximately 17 minutes, by my pocket watch, this process continued, until what lay upon the bed was scarcely recognizable as human remains. Rather, it resembled a form suggested by the arrangement of the bedclothes, with only the faintest indication of facial features. And then, as the church bells of St. Philip's began to toll 6 o'clock, even this faint suggestion dissipated, leaving nothing but the nightdress and bed linens, which settled with a soft exhalation, as though whatever had been supporting them had simply ceased to be. The immediate aftermath of Caroline Duval's extraordinary death was characterized by confusion, disbelief, and the beginning of a cover-up that would span generations of Charleston's medical and social elite. The 5 physicians who had attended her met within hours at the medical college, where a heated debate ensued over how to document the case. Dr. Frost, ever the pragmatist, argued for recording the death as due to a wasting illness of unknown origin, making no mention of the unprecedented manner of the corpse's disappearance. Dr. Wilson concurred, pointing out that their professional reputations would be irreparably damaged if they reported what they had witnessed. Dr. Edwards, the youngest of the group, initially insisted on full documentation of the case for the advancement of medical knowledge, but was eventually persuaded that such an account would never be believed. Only Dr. Moultrie, nearing the end of a distinguished career and perhaps less concerned with professional repercussions, suggested that they might be dealing with something beyond the current boundaries of medical science. His suggestion that the case might have metaphysical dimensions was met with uncomfortable silence from his colleagues. In the end, Caroline Duval's death certificate, signed by Dr. Harper, stated simply that she had succumbed to marasmus, a medical term of the era used to describe progressive emaciation from an undetermined cause. A funeral was held at St. Philip's Church, though the coffin that was interred in the churchyard contained only her nightdress and personal effects, a fact known only to the physicians and the household servants. The servants did not remain long in Charleston after their mistress's death. Mrs. Porter, Frederick the butler, and the maid Susanna disappeared from city records within months. Later investigation by Dr. Moultrie discovered that they had relocated to New Orleans, refusing all communication regarding their former employment. It might have ended there. An inexplicable case buried beneath layers of professional caution and social propriety. But in 1842, 3 years after Caroline Duval's death, new information emerged that cast the entire affair in a more sinister light. According to records discovered in the office of Charleston's coroner, Duval had been found in his study, his body frozen in an attitude of terror, his features contorted into what the examining physician described as a rictus of absolute horror. The official cause of death had been listed as heart failure, but the coroner's private notes indicated that no natural cause could explain the extreme condition of the corpse or the fact that Duval's hair had turned completely white, presumably in the moments before his death. Thomas Duval, Caroline's late husband, had not died of apoplexy, as had been reported in 1837. More disturbing still was the statement given by the housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, at the time of Thomas Duval's death. The master had been researching strange things these past months, books in languages I cannot read, meetings with foreign sailors who brought him artifacts from distant ports. The night before he died, I heard voices from his study, though he was alone. When I brought his evening tea, he told me, "I found a way to extend life beyond its natural span, Porter, not just by years, but potentially forever." I thought it was just the fanciful talk of a man who fears growing old. Now I wonder if he found something he should have left alone. Charleston in 1839 was a city of contradictions, a place of refined manners and brutal realities, of scientific advancement and deep-rooted superstitions. The Medical College of South Carolina, established in 1824, represented the pinnacle of modern medical thinking in the American South. Yet just blocks away in the market and along the wharves, Gullah Root doctors practiced healing arts that blended African traditions with New World adaptations. It was to one such practitioner that Dr. Moultrie turned in the final months of 1842, seeking understanding that Western medicine could not provide. His diary records a meeting with a woman known only as Mother Sybil, described as ancient in years but possessed of a clarity of mind that puts many of my colleagues to shame. Moultrie's account of this consultation reveals the depth of his desperation to understand the Duval case. "I have devoted my life to science, to the rational explanation of bodily phenomena. Yet what I witnessed in the death chamber of Caroline Duval exists so far beyond my understanding that I find myself seeking wisdom from sources I would once have dismissed." Mother Sybil, upon hearing the details of the case, was silent for so long that Moultrie thought she had perhaps fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her words were both cryptic and chilling. There are ways for a spirit to remain when its time has passed, ways to anchor itself to this world through another's flesh, but such unnatural extension comes at a terrible price. The host body rebels against the invader, trying to make itself unsuitable for habitation. What you saw, Doctor, was not one woman dying, but two souls struggling for dominance of a single vessel, and both of them lost. When pressed for clarification, Mother Sybil would say only, "Look to the husband's research. Look to what crossed the ocean to reach his hands. Some knowledge should remain buried in distant lands." Moultrie's subsequent investigation into Thomas Duval's final months revealed troubling connections. Duval had developed an obsessive interest in certain obscure Eastern philosophical and alchemical texts. His business correspondence showed that he had commissioned ships' captains to acquire specific artifacts and manuscripts from ports in India and China. Most significant was a journal found hidden in a compartment beneath the floor of Duval's study, discovered during renovations undertaken by the house's new owners in 1844. The journal, written in Duval's increasingly erratic hand, documented experiments with what he called the transference of essence, attempts to project his consciousness into objects and later, living creatures. The final entry, dated 3 days before his death, read, "Success at last. The essence can be transferred, not just temporarily, but with permanence. The vessel must be prepared, of course, a process requiring intimate connection. What more intimate connection than that of husband and wife? Caroline suspects nothing. She believes my late nights are devoted to business matters. She does not know she is to become my immortality. Tonight I complete the ritual. May God forgive me, though I go too far to turn back now." The journal found its way to Dr. Moultrie, who recognized its significance to the case that had haunted him for 5 years. His final notes on the matter, penned in 1848, just months before his own death, suggest a man still grappling with experiences that defied his medical training. I am left to conclude that what we witnessed in the case of Caroline Duval was neither a disease process as conventionally understood nor a supernatural occurrence beyond the realm of natural law. Rather, it appears to have been the catastrophic failure of an attempt to circumvent the natural order, an experiment in the continuation of consciousness beyond death that resulted in a battle for dominance within a single physical form. That both entities ultimately perished suggests there are boundaries that cannot be crossed, laws of nature that cannot be broken without dire consequences. The journal itself disappeared from Charleston in 1850, reportedly taken by a visiting physician from Philadelphia who had heard rumors of the Duval case. Its current whereabouts, if it still exists, remain unknown. For nearly 2 decades, the strange case of Caroline Duval faded from discussion in Charleston's medical circles. The physicians who had witnessed her extraordinary demise either died or, like Dr. Harper, refused to speak of it again. The Duval home on East Bay Street passed through several owners, none of whom remained in residence for more than a few years. Servants hired to work there frequently left without notice, citing vague complaints about discomfort and strange sounds in the walls. In 1868, as Reconstruction transformed the social and political landscape of Charleston, an unexpected echo of the Duval case emerged. A young woman named Eleanor Pierce, newly arrived from Boston to teach at a school for freed slaves, took lodgings in a boarding house on Meeting Street. Within weeks, she began to exhibit symptoms disturbingly reminiscent of Caroline Duval's affliction. Complaints of her bones becoming transparent, aversion to light, dramatic weight loss, and a voice that alternated between her own and a deeper masculine tone. The physician who attended her, Dr. Jonathan Gray, had been a medical student in 1839 and had heard whispered accounts of the Duval case from his professors. Recognizing the similarities, he contacted Dr. Harper, by then elderly and retired. Harper's response was a brief, unsigned note that read only, "Ask what connection she has to the Duval house or any objects from it." Investigation revealed that Miss Pierce had purchased an antique hand mirror at a shop on King Street, which the shopkeeper identified as having come from the estate sale of the Duval home's most recent owners. When the mirror was removed from Miss Pierce's possession and subsequently destroyed by Dr. Gray, who broke it into pieces and scattered them in the harbour, her symptoms reportedly subsided within days. Dr. Gray documented the case in a private monograph that circulated among a small circle of physicians interested in unusual medical phenomena. Titled Reflections on a Recurring Malady, the document suggested that whatever had afflicted Caroline Duval might be transmissible not through conventional contagion, but through objects associated with her or her husband. The Civil War and its aftermath transformed Charleston in profound ways, and many records were lost or destroyed. The medical college, which had been a center of innovation in Southern medicine, struggled to rebuild after the conflict. Yet the story of Caroline Duval persisted in the institutional memory of Charleston's medical community, not as an officially documented case, but as a cautionary tale passed from established physicians to promising students, from one generation to the next. In 1886, the Great Charleston earthquake damaged many historic structures, including the Duval home, which was subsequently demolished. During excavation for the new building that would replace it, workers uncovered a small, sealed chamber beneath what had been Thomas Duval's study. Inside was a collection of artifacts, carved figurines of unfamiliar design, manuscripts in Sanskrit and Mandarin, and a metal container etched with symbols that one worker described as moving beneath the eye, like living things. The foreman, a superstitious man familiar with local legends, ordered everything reburied, and the excavation moved several feet to the side. The new foundation was laid without disturbing the reburied items. His decision, questioned at the time as unnecessarily costly, may have prevented another recurrence of what had come to be known in certain circles as the Duval affliction. The final documented connection to the case came in 1905, when Dr. Elias Vanderhorst, then president of the South Carolina Medical Society, received a package from a colleague in Philadelphia. It contained Thomas Duval's journal, returned at last to Charleston, along with a letter explaining that it had been kept sealed in the archives of the College of Physicians of Philadelphia for over 50 years. Dr. Vanderhorst, after reading the journal and consulting the sparse remaining records of the case, made a decision that reflected both the scientific skepticism of the new century and a deeper wisdom born of Charleston's complex relationship with the unexplained. He had the journal sealed in a lead box, which was then placed in the Medical Society's archives, with instructions that it was not to be opened for 100 years. That box, according to records, was removed during renovations in 1958 and transferred to the Waring Historical Library, where it presumably remains to this day, its opening date now past, but its contents still undisturbed. Library staff, when questioned, claim no knowledge of such an item in their collections, and so the case of Caroline Duval, the dying widow science couldn't explain, remains one of Charleston's most enduring medical mysteries. Was she the victim of an unprecedented disease that mimicked supernatural phenomena? Was she the subject of her husband's terrible experiment in immortality? Or was there, as Mother Sybil suggested, a battle for possession that destroyed both occupants of a single physical form? In the centuries-old graveyards of Charleston, where history sleeps beneath moss-draped oaks, there is a plot in St. Philip's churchyard marked with Caroline Duval's name. The stone is weathered now, the inscription faded by time and salt air. Local guides sometimes include it on ghost tours of the historic district, telling visitors that on certain nights, particularly when the moon is new and the darkness complete, a faint luminescence can be seen hovering above the empty grave. A soft, prismatic glow that shifts and changes, as if caught in an eternal struggle to assume a definite form. Medical students from what is now the Medical University of South Carolina occasionally leave small tokens at the grave site. Not flowers or stones as might be left at other memorials, but sealed containers of various descriptions, jars, boxes, even modern plastic storage containers. When asked about this curious tradition, they smile uncomfortably and change the subject. Perhaps they know what the physicians of 1839 discovered through bitter experience, that some phenomena lie beyond the boundaries of current medical understanding, that the human body and the consciousness it houses contain mysteries that science has yet to fully illuminate, and that some knowledge once gained cannot be unlearned. It can only be contained in the hopes that future generations might be better prepared to face its implications. In the quiet streets of Charleston's historic district, where gas lamps still cast pools of golden light and horse-drawn carriages still clip-clop over cobblestones, the past is never fully past. It lingers in the architecture, in the customs, in the stories passed down through generations. And sometimes, if the stories are to be believed, it lingers in more tangible ways, in objects that carry echoes of long-dead owners, in mirrors that might reflect more than just the viewer's face, in the very air of rooms where extraordinary events once transpired. The case of Caroline Duval reminds us that even in an age of scientific advancement, when the mechanisms of disease are increasingly understood and the boundaries between life and death seem clearly defined, there remain experiences that defy easy categorization, experiences that suggest our understanding of reality, however sophisticated, may still be incomplete. And perhaps that is why her story continues to be whispered among medical students and historians, preservationists and paranormal investigators. Not merely as a ghost story to send shivers down the spine, but as a reminder of the humility required of those who seek to understand the deepest mysteries of human existence. A reminder that there may always be phenomena that, like Caroline Duval herself, in those final extraordinary moments, slip through the fingers of those who would grasp them, leaving nothing behind but questions without answers, and a lingering sense that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. For those who walk the streets of Charleston today, the name Caroline Duval has largely faded into obscurity, known only to a select few historians, medical researchers, and those with an interest in the darker corners of the city's past. Yet the ripples of her extraordinary case continue to influence the practice of medicine and the understanding of consciousness in subtle ways. In 1934, nearly a century after Caroline Duval's death, Dr. Margaret Holbrook, a researcher in neurology at the Medical College, came across references to the case while organizing the institution's historical archives. Intrigued by the fragmentary accounts, she began a methodical investigation, tracking down descendants of the original physicians and searching for any surviving documentation. Her inquiries led her to the aging granddaughter of Dr. James Moultrie, who had preserved her grandfather's private papers in a trunk in her attic on South Battery Street. Among these papers was a sealed envelope marked simply CD, not for public knowledge. Inside was a detailed account of Moultrie's consultation with Mother Sybil and his subsequent discoveries about Thomas Duval's experiments. Dr. Holbrook, a woman of science raised in the rational atmosphere of the early 20th century, initially approached the account with skepticism. Yet the clinical precision of Moultrie's observations and the corroborating notes from the other physicians convinced her that something truly extraordinary had occurred in that East Bay Street home in 1839. The consistency of the reported phenomena across multiple observers suggests that, whatever transpired, It was not merely mass hysteria or superstition, she wrote in her private journal. If we accept the observations as accurate, then we must consider explanations that extend beyond our current medical paradigms. Holbrook's investigation might have remained private had it not been for a series of incidents at the former site of the Duval home in the autumn of 1935. The building that had replaced the original residence, now housing a law firm on the ground floor and apartments above, became the scene of what newspaper accounts delicately referred to as unexplained disturbances. Tenants reported dramatic temperature fluctuations, the sound of glass cracking, though none was broken, and most disturbing, the occasional glimpse of what one resident described as a figure made of light, neither fully male nor female, that moves through walls as though they weren't there. When 3 separate tenants abandoned their leases within the span of 2 months, all citing similar experiences, the property owner consulted Dr. Holbrook, having heard of her interest in the history of the site. Her recommendation was unorthodox but effective. The entire ground beneath the building's foundation was excavated to a depth of 12 feet. The artifacts buried by the superstitious foreman in 1886 were discovered, carefully documented, and then, at Holbrook's insistence, sealed in a lead-lined container and reinterred in an undisclosed location well away from human habitation. The disturbances ceased following this intervention, but Dr. Holbrook's scientific curiosity was only intensified. In 1937, she published a paper in a small, specialized journal titled Persistent Consciousness Phenomena, Historical Cases and Modern Implications. Though she avoided naming Caroline Duval directly, the details of the case formed the centerpiece of her analysis. There exist in medical literature instances where consciousness appears to manifest properties inconsistent with our understanding of its dependence on physical brain function, she wrote. These cases, though rare, suggest the possibility that what we term consciousness may have dimensions or properties as yet unmeasured by current scientific instruments. The paper attracted little attention at the time, dismissed by mainstream medicine as speculative at best. Yet in recent decades, as research into consciousness has expanded beyond purely materialist paradigms, Holbrook's work has been rediscovered and cited with increasing frequency by those exploring the frontiers of cognitive science and quantum consciousness theory. In 1967, during the renovation of St. Philip's Churchyard, the decision was made to relocate certain graves to accommodate structural reinforcement of the historic church. When workers reached the plot marked as Caroline Duval's final resting place, they found, as the attending physicians had known they would, no physical remains. What they did discover, however, was unexpected. The soil within the grave exhibited unusual properties. According to the report filed by the geological consultant called to the scene, the earth had a crystalline quality, as though it had been subjected to extreme heat or pressure. Yet there was no evidence of either. Samples analyzed at Clemson University revealed an unexplainable molecular structure that one researcher described as ordered in a way that suggests intelligent design rather than natural formation. The findings were deemed scientifically anomalous, but not significant enough to warrant further investigation. The samples were archived in the university's geology department, where they remained until 2003, when advanced scanning technology revealed that the crystalline structures bore a remarkable resemblance to patterns now being identified in certain types of neural networks. This discovery prompted renewed interest in the Duval case among a small group of interdisciplinary researchers operating at the intersection of neuroscience, quantum physics, and consciousness studies. Their work, largely conducted outside mainstream academic channels due to its controversial nature, has produced intriguing hypotheses about the physical substrate of consciousness and the potential for conscious energy to exist independently of biological systems. Dr. Eleanor Visser, a leading figure in this research, has suggested that what the physicians witnessed in 1839 might have been the first documented case of consciousness transference followed by a catastrophic rejection reaction. Essentially, the host body rebelling against an invasive consciousness in ways that manifested physically. Visser's team has coined the term Duval syndrome to describe a theoretical condition in which one consciousness attempts to inhabit a body already occupied by another consciousness, resulting in a distinctive pattern of physical and psychological symptoms. Though purely speculative at present, the concept has found its way into discussions of certain psychiatric conditions that resist conventional diagnosis. In 2018, during construction of a new medical research facility on the campus of the Medical University of South Carolina, workers excavating for the foundation uncovered a small lead box bearing the seal of the South Carolina Medical Society. Inside was Thomas Duval's journal, apparently moved from its supposed location in the Waring Historical Library at some point in the mid-20th century. University officials, recognizing the potential historical significance of the find, turned the journal over to a team of conservators and historians for careful examination. Their preliminary report indicated that the journal contained detailed accounts of experiments in what would now be termed consciousness transfer, including methodologies derived from ancient Eastern practices but modified with Western empirical approaches. Most disturbing were the entries documenting Thomas Duval's trials with animals, descriptions of attempts to project his consciousness into creatures ranging from birds to the household cat, with increasingly successful results noted in the weeks leading up to his final experiment. The final pages of the journal, those detailing the actual methodology used in his attempt to transfer his consciousness to his wife, had been carefully excised, cut out with surgical precision. A note attached to the inside back cover, written in what graphologists later identified as Dr. Elias Vanderhorst's handwriting, stated simply, "Some knowledge must remain buried. This much is preserved as warning, not instruction." Following extensive debate about the ethical implications, the university made the decision to digitize the journal for preservation while restricting access to qualified researchers who meet strict ethical criteria. The physical journal was returned to a secure archive, its location known only to select university officials. In the years since, the Duval case has taken on new significance in light of advancing research into the nature of consciousness. What was once dismissed as an inexplicable anomaly or the product of 19th century superstition is now being re-examined through the lens of quantum consciousness theory, non-local awareness, and emerging understandings of consciousness as potentially separable from its biological substrate. For the residents of modern Charleston, the story of Caroline Duval exists primarily as a footnote in the city's rich tapestry of historical oddities and ghost stories. Tour guides occasionally mention her as they lead groups past the site where the Duval home once stood, now occupied by a trendy restaurant, whose owners remain unaware of the location's darker history. Yet, for those who know where to look, the echoes of the case remain visible in the city's landscape and cultural practices. The tradition of placing mirrors face down during thunderstorms, still observed in some of Charleston's oldest families, is said to date back to the Duval incident. Certain spaces in the city's historic homes, areas under stairs, closets with no apparent purpose, are sometimes referred to as Duval closets, places where unwanted energies can be contained. And then there are the dreams, a peculiar phenomenon reported by a statistically significant number of medical students who study in Charleston. Dreams of a woman whose skin seems to refract light, who speaks in two voices simultaneously, who extends a hand that appears solid until the dreamer tries to grasp it, at which point it dissolves into prismatic fragments. The dreams, follow a consistent pattern. The woman leads the dreamer through an unfamiliar house to a study filled with books in foreign languages. She points to a specific volume, trying to communicate something of urgent importance. But before the dreamer can understand, they awaken, left with only a lingering sense of unease and a phrase that echoes in their mind. Two cannot occupy where only one belongs. Psychologists at the university have documented dozens of these dreams over the past several decades, noting their consistency across individuals who have no prior knowledge of the Duval case. The phenomenon has been attributed to everything from the power of suggestion to something in the local water supply. Yet the dreams persist, generation after generation, as though Caroline Duval, or whatever remains of her, is still trying to convey a warning from beyond the boundaries of conventional existence. In 2023, Dr. Amara Johnson, a neurologist specializing in consciousness disorders at the Medical University of South Carolina, established the Duval Initiative, a research program dedicated to investigating cases that exhibit similarities to the historical Duval case. The initiative focuses on patients with rare conditions involving disturbed self-perception, identity discontinuity, and unexplained physical transformations. While we approach these cases from a rigorously scientific perspective, we remain open to explanations that may challenge conventional medical paradigms, Dr. Johnson explained in an interview. The history of medicine is filled with phenomena that were initially dismissed as impossible, only to be later understood through advances in our theoretical frameworks. The initiative has documented several cases that bear striking resemblances to aspects of Caroline Duval's condition, though none that replicate the full constellation of symptoms or the extraordinary manner of her death. Most involve individuals who, following severe trauma or near-death experiences, report a persistent sense that something else is attempting to occupy their consciousness, a presence they experience as distinct from themselves, yet existing within the same physical space. What makes these cases particularly intriguing from a medical perspective is that they often present with measurable physical anomalies, unexplained fluctuations in body temperature, unusual electrical activity in the brain, and in the most extreme cases, subtle alterations in the optical properties of the skin and other tissues. We're dealing with the frontiers of our understanding of consciousness, Dr. Johnson notes. The Duval case, however we interpret it through a modern lens, reminds us that consciousness may be more complex, more mutable, and potentially more independent of its physical substrate than our current models suggest. As the research continues, the legacy of Caroline Duval, the dying widow science couldn't explain, remains a persistent reminder of the mysteries that still lie at the intersection of mind, body, and whatever might exist beyond the boundaries of both. Her story spans nearly 2 centuries of medical progress, from the humoral theories of early 19th century practice to the quantum consciousness models of the present day, yet still resists definitive explanation. Perhaps that is as it should be. Some mysteries, by their nature, exist not to be solved, but to remind us of the limitations of our understanding, to keep us humble in the face of phenomena that transcend our current capacity to explain them. In that sense, Caroline Duval's legacy is not one of fear or superstition, but of intellectual humility and the endless quest for knowledge that drives both science and human curiosity. For those who walk the streets of Charleston on quiet evenings, when the gas lamps cast their golden glow and the salt breeze whispers through the palmetto trees, there remains the faint possibility of glimpsing something extraordinary. A momentary shimmer in the air, a brief refraction of light where no prism hangs, a fleeting sense of being observed by eyes that exist in some state between presence and absence. And in that moment, the boundary between the explicable and the mysterious, between science and wonder, becomes as transparent as Caroline Duval's skin was said to have become in her final days, revealing depths beyond depths, questions beyond questions, and the humbling recognition that some aspects of existence may forever remain just beyond our grasp, visible only from the corner of the eye or in the deepest reaches of the dreaming mind. In the end, perhaps that is what Caroline Duval still whispers to those who encounter her story, that consciousness, whether housed in flesh or transformed into something beyond our comprehension, remains the greatest mystery of all, a frontier where science and wonder walk hand in hand, and where the answers we seek may ultimately change the very nature of the questions we ask. Charleston sleeps now under a blanket of stars, its historic homes and narrow streets bearing silent witness to centuries of human joy and suffering, triumph and tragedy, knowledge gained and wisdom hard-won. And somewhere in that tapestry of time and experience, Caroline Duval's story continues to unfold, not ended with her extraordinary death, but merely transformed, like her physical form, into something that exists beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. A whisper in the dark, a reflection where no mirror hangs, a presence felt but never seen directly, a mystery that science couldn't explain, then or now.